he did not approve of this particular lifestyle, and then make note in there of Rahm Emanuel and the Boston mayor Menino, who basically said, you know what, if you're going to have these views, we're not going to allow you in our city.
And he was actually the one that was violating laws at that point. The guy who came out with the anti-gay statement, as much as many people may disagree with it, he still wasn't saying you can't buy a sandwich.
And that's the other piece. He's basically saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to take anybody's money that's going to come in here and get a reasonably priced chicken sandwich. I'm not going to discriminate if somebody wants to come here and work. These kinds of things.
And didn't the guy who banned the stores actually have to drop that ban? And allow
I don't know about that, and if you found that somewhere else, don't say it on the tape, because then I'll have to test you on it. But the idea basically is this: when you think about it, Chick-fil-A walked away from that a little bit. Some people would argue, was just exercising his free speech rights, so he should be allowed to do this. Others said he's making a political statement, and every time you buy one of those chicken sandwiches, you're funding that political statement. And as such, you are just as guilty as he would be. Okay, I don't want to test you on that either. The other one was red plates, blue plates. And this, if you remember, was talking about Cracker Barrel. And if you remember, this one was also talking about Whole Foods. And it was suggesting, and take a look at this article, but it was suggesting in there that you go to eat at Cracker Barrel, you're more likely to be Republican. And if you shop at Whole Foods, you're more likely to be Democrat. And they found it very interesting that Cracker Barrels were typically in all Republican counties. And in fact, Whole Foods were in largely Democratic ones. And again, you can predict a little bit of your political views, not just based on what role you think government should have, but on something as basic as where you shop.
So what did that link to in the chapter?
It linked in the chapter the idea that not only can you predict somebody's political views based on how big of a role they felt government should have, but you could predict it based on where they shopped. No, I mean, seriously, that's exactly what it was. And see, understand on this, this overlaps with Republicans and Democrats. This also overlaps with political culture, because we're a very consumerist kind of a society. So this could go in both places.
Is this also where you covered red state, blue state?
Well, yeah, actually I did. And then this was from that quote on page 124, talking about the red states, blue states. America seems like it's two different countries. And then we got into some of these other issues.
But that was all that was about red state, blue states? There wasn't more?
That was basically it, and it was really lined up with this idea of Republicans and Democrats. It was lined up with this political culture idea, and it was lined up also ultimately with some of these places that you shop.
Anything on welfare or any of the other stuff?
No.
Okay.
That's all we dealt with that. Now, a couple of other things, and I know I'm coming up on time. I don't want to go too long on this. We've dealt with Walmart voting. Morning class Rwanda is for you tomorrow. It deals with government socialization. Y'all had this last week. And the idea that when you think back to it, Rwanda, what was Rwanda known for last week?
Genocide.
Okay, genocide is one, but the genocide, today, the idea, I want to say, was that 87.5% of the population in Rwanda is female and 12.5% is male. But what did that have to do with government socialization?
Because it had the largest group of females in their government organization, when in reality it should have more than what it already has.
Rwanda has the largest percentage of females in their parliamentary body, in their government body, the Rwandan government. And I believe the number based on the article was like 47.7%, which sounds damn impressive.
Not when they're 90% of the
But when
population.
you look at the numbers and actually 87.5% of the population is females, yes, it seems like it should be higher. So even when government socializes, that can get a little bit squirrely. Talked about red plates. Purging gender and the prejudice simulation. You had the Purging Gender article in the night class. This was talking about Sweden and the idea, and we talked about this in the day class just last week, in fact, the idea that they wanted to create a unisex pronoun, which was hen, H-E-N. I guess hun, H-O-N, and han, H-A-N, not necessarily in any particular order, represented males and females. And what was it that Sweden was trying to do, talking about this purging gender roles?
They were trying to get to kids at an early age and keep them from, the idea like in America, boys play with trucks, girls play with dolls.
Yeah.
And they even had sensitivity type classes for the teachers there, trying to say, hey, don't use him, her, boys, girls, just use hen.
Yeah, and if you remember with this, and I know in the morning class I'd asked the guys if they would wear their girlfriend's shirts
Oh, yeah.
And I had asked the girls if they wear their guy shirts, their boyfriend shirts, and I remember, I think, saying that there was something hot about a woman wearing one of my Oxfords, maybe in the morning class, maybe not the night class, I gotta be careful. But as I recall, none of the guys in the morning class wanted to wear their girlfriend's shirts, and Luis was the one that said he was too big to wear her shirt. But in fact, many of them had said, no, there's a certain message there. And when you think about what Sweden is trying to do, they're basically saying, why is it that boys are better on SAT math and girls are better on the verbal part? Why is it that boys are more engineers and girls are more nurses? Why is it, when you think about it, that there are these differences? Why is it that a demanding male boss is respected, but a demanding female boss is a bitch? These were some of the things that we've been talking about. And Sweden is saying we want to eliminate these gender roles, and one of the best ways to do it is to treat everybody the same. Have people doing what they want or what they could do in these catalogs versus what society imposes on them. It's a good example of school beginning to change values, although I don't know that I necessarily mentioned it that way, but it's a really good example of that. You could use this in feminism too. If you look at the prejudice sim, the prejudice sim was the South Carolina school, private school, that was actually doing the Holocaust simulation, and both of you just had this last week, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but that's a really good one. There's a lot in there, and it's another good example. Anthem, prejudice simulation, purging gender are all examples of schools stepping in and dealing with these values or establishing certain values.
And isn't it also the Huck Finn article? Which
And then the Huck Finn article is the last one that's up there, and all hell broke loose. Several of you left in the night class that night
That they should
before
take the
we dealt with
N-word
Huck
out.
Finn. Good God, that was one of those nights.
What?
You
But
should take the N-word out of the book.
take the N-word out of Huck Finn. Does anybody remember how many times it was mentioned?
Hundreds. I remember it was hundreds.
Okay,
I don't
that's a
remember how
start.
many.
It was a lot.
Was it 219 times? I think it was 219 times that it's mentioned. And there's a political cartoon on my door that says, since the there's a teacher teaching a class, and the teacher says, since the N-word has been raised 219 times in Huckleberry Finn, that makes Mark Twain A, and a little kid raises his hand and says gangsta rapper. You know, you get the idea on this, but yeah, there it is. It's 219 times. Do you remember what word he wanted to change it to?
Slave.
Slave. In both classes, a lot of people had not read Huck Finn. And there was an argument out there that you needed to change, yeah, you missed this one. The idea that you needed to change this so that instead of there being the N-word, it would read slave, so that in fact it would be more tolerable to different populations. Or, let me rephrase that, it would be more tolerable to different communities by not basically alienating different populations.
And I
Now,
remember you really liked the idea of leaving it up to the people in each kind of
that
district
was
to decide
actually
that.
Victor that wanted to leave it up to the individual people. So there's questions here. The first question is this censorship? And should we really censor this because this is such a revered work? And when you look through American history, it is. There is another debate in here that says, wait a minute, this is an offensive word, and there are a lot of young kids that are not going to feel comfortable, a lot of older teachers that aren't going to feel, I mean older than 29 anyway, that aren't going to feel comfortable when you think about it in terms of teaching this word. And then when you look at this, there are some folks that are going to say, this isn't about censorship, and this was Victor coming in, and he made a damn good point actually, when he said it should be the local communities that ultimately decide what the book should be. And I hadn't really thought about that. It made sense. But it seems like that's sidestepping the censorship issue when you think about it. Ultimately, what you're seeing is that there's a huge debate on this because the N-word is so sensitive, and it is a good example of a culturally sensitive word. There's no doubt about this. But having said this, fewer and fewer people are reading it, and the argument would be if we change the word, then more people would get to use this because it would be a less controversial book. We'll kind of see, because a lot in both classes, at least the morning class, the bigger class especially, did not believe in censoring this. So that's that. Now looking at terms, and I don't want to keep you too much longer because we already got this thing started late today, but just looking at terms. The last one really up here is Korematsu. We're going to deal with that tomorrow for y'all. We dealt with y'all with Korematsu last week. Be able to tell me the story of the case? Not right now, but be able to tell me the story of the case. And then, in fact, you know, that'll be a good way to
Is
go.
it Japanese American?
Yes, and this is the context of you're a sap, Mr. Jap, and that also might be a good thing to ultimately end up dealing with on
Sorry,
the exam as well. What's that?
What did you say? The second thing you just said?
You're a sap, Mr. Jap, and y'all are going to get that tomorrow. Yeah, y'all are going to get that tomorrow. We're going to have some cartoons in there. Do y'all have any questions about anything?
Unitary system versus federal system in chapter 4.
Okay, so now you want to go all the way back to the beginning, you
Well,
do.
you skipped me.
Okay, unitary system and federal system. If you remember with the unitary system, and we had this in the outline, the idea basically is that there was one government that basically oversaw everything. And then you had the federal system like you do in the United States, which basically means that there are many different ideas or many different levels. And if you remember with this unitary system, France was an example of this, Israel could be an example of this. And I believe the chapter had mentioned specifically regarding France that the Minister of Education would know exactly what verb they were conjugating in Latin on what day at what time.
Yeah.
That is the idea of how much authority that they
And
have.
which article is related to that?
That's just straight from the chapter. And we mentioned that one in the class. Now, and there wasn't an article. This was really more of a quickie. When you look at the federal system, it's the United States. And the trick on this one is that in the United States, there are multiple levels of government that are going to divide functions. There are multiple levels of government that are going to divide functions between the feds and between the state. So when you look at this, it mentions, and this is on page 65, this is the second indented paragraph, it says, in federal systems, the central government has exclusive control over foreign defense and monetary policy. The state typically controls education, police, highways, and other close-to-home affairs.
Sorry, where is that?
This is the second full indented paragraph on page 65. It's under federal systems. So when you look at this, it's talking about this division. The other piece with this is this idea of laboratories of democracy. The states are going to have the ability to experiment. And when the states have the ability to experiment, these could become national policies. When you think about a unitary system, there's not a lot of experimentation that's going to be going on. Now, the other piece to this, and as you look at the videos, you'll see this, is chapter 6. And pretty much straight definitions on there. There's 3 videos that I added for both classes. Please watch those before and you know, put some good definitions on these. It's possible that this could turn into maybe 1 or 2 short answer type questions. But chapter 6 is going to be reasonably small. I'm thinking 15, 20 points on the overall exam. It appears that chapter 4 has got to be big. It appears that chapter 3 and chapter 7 have got the biggest articles. Okay? What's that? Oh, and 14. You know, if I didn't say it, let me make sure I say it now. 14 is the year that you are supposed to reach your political maturity.
Oh, political socialization.
Political
14.
socialization at 14, and this came straight from the chapter. And it basically says that the idea is it's not to say that you will know everything that you need to know at 14, but it's to say that you're capable of knowing and understanding politics, the political system, by age 14. That's what that's saying.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It's on an article. It's the article with the abortion. No, it wasn't the woman who went around in the truck.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
the
that
addicts article, and you know what? I didn't talk about that one.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorites. So Barbara Harris, and she's really, that's the last article. It's the very top up there, the addicts article. It's in there. Be able to tell me that story.
Oh, okay. That's
Be able to tell me that story. And that relates, Barbara Harris is considered a peer. So when you think about it, the parents, the Obamacare article, Obamacare Moms, was a good example of parental or family socialization. When you think about school, we had Anthem. When you think about school, we had the prejudice simulation, we had Huck Finn, we had Purging Gender. When you think about peer, we had Barbara Harris. Government, which the morning class is going to get tomorrow, it's going to be fairly quick, was Rwanda. And then we're going to delve into the cartoons, the media. And that's where we're going to get into Eurosap, Mr. Jab. And these were all examples of articles dealing with socialization.
Do you want us to sign?